The world is watching, and it's not impressed. While Donald Trump wages his war against transgender and non-binary Americans, something unprecedented is happening on the world stage.
Federal government shutdown. Millions of American federal workers are under enormous financial stress as a result, wondering how they will pay their bills and take care of their families. If the Democrats do not vote to open the government tonight, federal workers will not receive their next full paycheck. Additionally, the special supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children will run out of federal money very soon. This program provides vouchers to buy infant formula, fresh fruits and vegetables, and other healthy foods for low-income families. It can be easily fully funded if Democrats simply vote tonight to reopen the government. Also, our incredible military service members who risk their lives to preserve and defend our country are now working without pay and will miss their next paychecks if this Democrat shutdown does not end tonight. The Republican-backed clean and nonpartisan funding bill fully funds this important food aid program, gets our troops paid, and reopens the government. So all of this begs the question, what is the Democrat ongoing shutdown truly about? The sad truth, we believe, is that the Democrats intentionally shut down the government and are inflicting this pain on American citizens to try and demand free health care for illegal aliens. Of course, this is an indefensible and truly radical policy to be in favor of, let alone to use as the primary reason to shut down the United States government. So the Democrats and their allies are desperately lying about their true motivations. We have to set the record straight with the facts so the American people understand what's really at play here. House Republicans passed a clean and nonpartisan funding bill to keep the government open and ensure our troops and other hardworking Americans are paid. Every single House Democrat except one voted against this clean and nonpartisan funding bill. Senate Republicans have subsequently tried to pass this same clean funding bill 4 separate times, and they will do so again tonight, to fully pass it to be sent to the president's desk for signature. And the president is ready to sign this bill to reopen the government as soon as it is sent to his desk.
Countries around the globe are issuing warnings to their own citizens about traveling to the United States. We're not talking about war-torn regions or unstable governments. We're talking about America's closest allies, friends, nations that have stood with the United States for generations. Germany, Denmark, the Netherlands, France, Ireland, Finland, Norway, and even Canada. They're all telling their people to think twice before coming here. So what exactly triggered this extraordinary international backlash, and why are America's most trusted partners suddenly treating the U.S. like a destination that requires special warnings? To understand this diplomatic crisis, we need to examine what Trump did on day one of his return to the presidency. On January 20th, 2025, Donald Trump signed an executive order that fundamentally altered how the United States government recognizes and documents gender identity. The order declared that the U.S. would only acknowledge 2 biological sexes, male and female. It defined sex as an individual's immutable biological classification, determined at conception and recognized at birth, completely rejecting the concept of gender identity as valid.
Sure. I think my reaction is probably a combination of shock and embarrassment. On one hand, you have the Secretary of Defense who is saying lethality, lethality, lethality. He wants the troops to be more lethal. And then on the other hand, you have the President of the United States saying, I want training to happen in American cities. So how exactly are they going to train the military on becoming more lethal in American cities? None of that makes sense. It's extremely dangerous, and troops should not be normalizing that behavior.
But if the president is going to deploy the U.S. military into these cities, and he's already done that, and he's got a series of cities that he vows to do that again, why not make training part of that mission as well?
Because the military is not designed for domestic operations. Law enforcement is designed for keeping cities safe, crowd control, the things that I think is what the administration wants to use it for. Let me explain that when the military deploys, for example, before a unit goes on a combat deployment, they receive training on the rules of engagement. They learn about, for example, what is the declared hostile force? Who can we kill and how can we kill them? How do we engage the enemy, right? they're not receiving training on how to apply the First Amendment to protesters in a foreign country. So we can't expect the military to understand how to apply what would normally be overseas rules of engagement to a domestic training environment, like the United States with its constitutional protections of its citizens.
But the real impact came from the implementation. The order directed the State Department to require that all government issued documents, including passports, visas, and global entry cards, must reflect only the holder's sex assigned at birth. This wasn't just a policy change, it was an erasure of identity for thousands of Americans. Under the Biden administration, passport applicants could select M, F, or X as their gender marker, with the X option specifically created for non-binary, intersex, and gender non-conforming individuals. This aligned the United States with many of its Democratic allies who had already implemented similar inclusive policies. Under Trump's new directive, that option vanished overnight, leaving thousands of Americans with documents that no longer reflected their lived reality. Within 48 hours of the executive order taking effect, the State Department began holding passport applications from transgender, intersex, and non-binary people. Some applicants received their documents back with incorrect gender markers, forcibly changed to match their sex assigned at birth rather than their actual identity. Others had their applications rejected entirely, leaving them unable to travel internationally. The human cost was immediate and devastating. Consider the case of transgender actor Hunter Schafer, who submitted her passport application with the female gender marker she'd used on her driver's license and previous passport. Instead of receiving the document she needed, she was issued a new passport marked male, essentially forcing her to carry identification that contradicted her identity and potentially exposed her to discrimination or worse. But Trump's assault on transgender rights extended far beyond passport policies. The administration announced comprehensive plans to ban transgender people from military service and moved to block federal support for gender-affirming healthcare for minors. This represented a systematic attack on an entire community's basic rights and dignity, and the international community took immediate notice. The legal challenges began almost instantly. The American Civil Liberties Union filed a landmark lawsuit called Orr versus Trump in February 2025. Representing 7 transgender and non-binary Americans whose constitutional rights were being violated by these policies. The case argued that the passport policy violated multiple constitutional protections: the Equal Protection Clause, the Due Process Clause, and even the First Amendment, as it essentially forced people to carry documents that contradicted their identity and potentially outed them against their will. In June 2025, Federal Judge Indira Kobik delivered a crushing blow to Trump's discriminatory policy. She issued a comprehensive preliminary injunction, finding that the passport restrictions likely violated the constitutional rights of thousands of Americans. The judge specifically noted that the policy discriminated based on sex and was rooted in nothing more than irrational prejudice toward transgender Americans. The injunction provided crucial relief, allowing transgender and non-binary people without valid passports, those whose passports were expiring within a year, and those needing to update their documents to do so with their correct gender markers. When the Trump administration immediately appealed, the First Circuit Court of Appeals denied their request to stay the order, affirming the lower court's protection of civil rights. Undeterred by these legal setbacks, Trump's team escalated their fight to the Supreme Court, asking the justices to lift the injunction and allow full enforcement of the discriminatory policy. But while Trump was fighting these battles in American courtrooms, something remarkable was happening internationally. America's allies were watching in horror, and they started taking unprecedented action. Germany was among the first nations to issue formal travel warnings. The German Foreign Office advised all travelers with an X gender marker or whose current gender presentation differs from their birth assignment to contact U.S. diplomatic missions before attempting to travel to America. This wasn't a casual suggestion or routine update. It came after Immigration and Customs Enforcement detained several German citizens visiting the United States, creating an international incident. Denmark quickly followed suit, with their foreign ministry issuing stark warnings that travelers with X gender markers or those who had legally changed their gender should contact the U.S. Embassy before any travel plans. Danish LGBTQ plus advocate Suzanne Branner Jespersen told Danish national radio that they were deeply concerned people could be stopped at airports and refused entry, or face inappropriate, invasive, and uncomfortable situations at the hands of U.S. immigration officials. The Netherlands issued similarly serious warnings, noting that laws and customs toward LGBTQ plus people in the United States might differ significantly from Dutch standards of equality and dignity. Their advisory specifically stated that all travelers must now indicate their gender at birth when applying for American travel documents, regardless of their current legal gender. France advised its citizens to regularly consult the U.S. Embassy in Paris for updates before traveling, specifically warning about new requirements to indicate sex assigned at birth on all visa and travel applications. The French government expressed concern about the safety and treatment of their transgender and non-binary citizens in America. Ireland joined this growing international chorus, warning that ESTA and visa applications now require travelers to declare their biological sex at birth, and those with X markers should contact the U.S. Embassy for special guidance before attempting to travel. Finland updated its comprehensive travel advisory to warn citizens that U.S. authorities might deny entry to those whose passport gender doesn't match their assigned birth sex, advising all affected citizens to check with U.S. authorities well in advance. Norway, Slovakia, and Portugal all issued similar urgent warnings, creating an unprecedented situation where nearly a dozen allied nations were cautioning their citizens about basic travel to the United States, not because of terrorism or crime, but because of official government discrimination. But the most significant and symbolic warning came from Canada, America's closest neighbor, largest trading partner, and longest-standing ally. In October 2025, Canada updated its travel advisory with language that would have been unthinkable just years earlier. The warning was stark and unprecedented in the history of U.S.-Canadian relations. While the government of Canada issues passports with an X gender identifier, it cannot guarantee your entry or transit through other countries, including the United States. You might face entry restrictions in countries that do not recognize the X gender identifier. Current systems used by some countries and travel companies may not recognize the X gender identifier, and you may still be asked to provide sex or gender information as either male or female when traveling. This wasn't just bureaucratic language or routine travel guidance. This was Canada essentially telling its citizens that the United States could no longer be trusted to respect their basic human dignity and legal documentation. The Canadian government also announced it would no longer issue new or renewed Nexus cards, which provide expedited travel between the U.S. and Canada, with X gender markers directly impacting thousands of Canadians who had chosen the gender-neutral option since it became available in 2019. Think about the profound implications here. We're talking about countries that have been America's staunchest allies for generations. Nations that fought alongside the United States in 2 world wars, that stood with America throughout the Cold War, that rallied to support the U.S. after September 11th. These same countries are now warning their citizens that traveling to America might not be safe for LGBTQ plus people. They're treating the United States the way they might treat countries with poor human rights records. The international response reveals something crucial about the global impact of Trump's domestic policies. They don't exist in isolation. When the United States, historically seen as the world's most powerful democracy and a beacon of freedom, decides to systematically discriminate against its own citizens, it sends shockwaves throughout the international community. These travel advisories represent far more than just passport policies or bureaucratic concerns. They're about fundamental human rights, dignity, and the values that democratic nations are supposed to share. Countries are essentially declaring they don't trust the United States to treat their citizens fairly if those citizens happen to be transgender, non-binary, or intersex. The economic implications alone are staggering. International tourism is a massive industry, generating hundreds of billions in revenue annually. When allied nations start warning their citizens about traveling to the U.S., it affects everything from airlines to hotels to restaurants to local businesses that depend on international visitors. Statistics Canada reported that travel from Canada to the U.S. declined significantly in 2025, with motor vehicle trips down 37% year over year in July alone, a devastating blow to border communities. But the real damage extends far beyond economics. It strikes at the heart of America's standing in the world. For decades, the United States positioned itself as the global champion of freedom and human rights. Countries looked to America as an example of how democracies should function, how they should protect their most vulnerable citizens, how they should lead by moral example. Trump's anti-transgender policies have shattered that carefully cultivated image. When your closest allies start treating the United States like an unsafe destination, it represents a fundamental shift in how the world views American values and leadership. The irony is particularly bitter when you consider that U.S. Customs and Border Protection has publicly stated that LGBTQ plus foreign nationals wouldn't face problems entering the country. A spokesperson told the Washington Post that a foreign traveler's gender, as indicated on their passport, and their personal beliefs about sexuality do not render a person inadmissible, calling claims to the contrary false and misleading. But actions speak louder than carefully crafted press statements, and the actions of the Trump administration have created an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty that extends far beyond U.S. borders. When government policy contradicts government assurances, the international community understandably errs on the side of protecting their citizens. The legal challenges continue to unfold in real time. While Judge Kobach's injunction remains in place for now, protecting many transgender and non-binary Americans' right to accurate passports, the Trump administration continues its aggressive appeals process. The Supreme Court could potentially overturn the lower court's decision, which would immediately reinstate the discriminatory policy and affect thousands of Americans. Meanwhile, Lambda Legal and other civil rights organizations are fighting additional battles in federal courts across the country, representing clients whose passport applications have been delayed, denied, or altered without their consent. Each case represents not just a legal argument, but a human being trying to live their life with dignity. The broader implications extend throughout American society. Trump's executive order represents a comprehensive assault on transgender rights that includes military service bans, restrictions on healthcare access, limitations on federal recognition of gender identity, and attacks on inclusive education policies. Each of these policies sends a clear message to the international community about American values and priorities under the Trump administration. The unprecedented nature of these international travel advisories cannot be overstated. While countries occasionally issue warnings about specific security threats, natural disasters, or political instability, having multiple allied nations warn their citizens about potential discrimination by the U.S. government itself represents a new low in America's international standing. These warnings join earlier advisories about gun violence and other safety concerns, creating a comprehensive picture of an America that's increasingly seen as unpredictable, dangerous, and potentially hostile to certain groups. The contrast with previous administrations is stark and telling. Under Biden, the United States had worked diligently to rebuild relationships with allies and position America as a leader on human rights issues globally. The introduction of X gender markers on passports was seen as a progressive step that aligned with similar policies in allied nations, demonstrating American leadership on inclusion. Trump's reversal of these policies has not only damaged America's reputation, but created practical problems for international travel, trade, and cooperation. Diplomatic relationships depend on trust, and when that trust is broken over fundamental human rights issues, it affects every aspect of international relations. The situation has also highlighted the complex legal landscape surrounding gender identity and travel documents in an interconnected world. While some existing passports with X markers remain valid until their natural expiration, the uncertainty about renewal has created overwhelming anxiety for thousands of Americans who depend on accurate documentation for their safety, security, and ability to travel. For transgender and non-binary Americans, carrying identification that doesn't match their lived identity can expose them to discrimination, harassment, or even violence. The policy essentially forces them to choose between traveling with inaccurate and potentially dangerous documents or not traveling at all, a choice that no American should have to make in a free society. The international response has also revealed the truly global nature of LGBTQ plus rights advocacy. Organizations in multiple countries have coordinated their responses, sharing information and best practices for protecting their citizens. This international solidarity stands in stark contrast to the Trump administration's isolationist approach to human rights. As the legal battles continue and the international backlash intensifies, one thing becomes crystal clear. Trump's war on transgender rights has backfired spectacularly on the world stage. Instead of projecting strength or traditional values, these policies have made America look petty, discriminatory, and dangerously out of step with its closest allies. The travel advisories represent more than just bureaucratic warnings or diplomatic protests. They're a collective judgment by the international community about the direction America is heading under Trump's leadership. When your closest allies start warning their citizens about you, when they start treating you like a country with serious human rights problems, it's time to take a hard look in the mirror. The question now is whether the American people will accept this diminished standing in the world, or whether they'll demand better from their leaders. Will they allow their country to become an international pariah on human rights, or will they fight to restore America's reputation as a beacon of freedom and dignity for all? The world is watching, and the verdict so far is damning. Trump's anti-transgender policies haven't made America great again. They've made America an international outlier on basic human rights. And that's a legacy that will be extraordinarily difficult to overcome, regardless of what happens in the courts or in future elections. The damage to America's reputation and relationships may take years or even decades to repair, assuming there's even a willingness to do so. Trust, once broken, is not easily restored, especially when it comes to fundamental human rights. For now, the message from America's allies is unmistakably clear. When it comes to basic human rights and dignity, the United States under Trump can no longer be trusted. And that should concern every American who cares about their country's place in the world.